I love zombies. Don't believe me? Just take a quick glance at my YouTube videos. My obsession with these beasts started 11 years ago when my second eldest cousin introduced me to this level in Call of Duty Black Ops 2 named Transit. My memory of that night is pretty vague, but what I do remember is this mixed feeling of excitement, fear, and a yearn for explanations as to why am I here? What are these strange creatures and why are they attacking me? And am I safe on this bus? From then, it turned into my 12-year-old self sneaking into the living room to play my cousin's PlayStation, to me and my cousin living and breathing Call of Duty Zombies into my most prominent hobbies, even today. Later on in life, I acquired a newfound love in Resident Evil, as I adored the puzzle-solving nature of the game, and the zombies only enhanced the atmosphere of them. Until Resident Evil 4 fucked it up. The zombie subgenre is represented in pretty much all of my favorite things, from some of my favorite video games, to some of my favorite movies, to even some of my favorite books. My endearment to this subgenre would not have been possible without this man right here. George A. Romero was born on February 4th, 1940. After growing up in the Bronx for most of his childhood, Romero moved to Pittsburgh to pursue his passion for art, design, and drama at Carnegie Mellon University. After graduation, Romero shot and directed many commercials, which would eventually lead to him and 9 others creating Image 10 Production, which is the same company that produced his now classic film, Night of the Living Dead. This would spawn a multitude of sequels that vary greatly in quality, from amazing to downright disappointing. Romero's zombie filmology is definitely not without its misses, but there is definitely something to appreciate about each of these films, and their stamp on the horror genre cannot go unnoticed. Ergo, in this video, I will be reviewing and ranking each of the Romero zombie films, as well as some killer and abysmal remakes. Just as a fair warning, this video is going to include moderate to severe spoilers for the majority of these movies. I won't be following along with the plot like a dead meat kill count would, but I still highly recommend that if you plan to watch any of these movies and don't want to be spoiled, to watch the movie before watching my review. So, let's start all the way at the beginning and travel back in time to October 1st, 1968. Siblings Johnny and Barbara head to a cemetery in rural Pennsylvania to visit their dad's grave. Subsequently, a lifeless man in a tattered suit attacks Barbara and kills Johnny. Barbara flees to a nearby farmhouse with a strange man still following her. After being bombarded by even more animated corpses, an actual living man, Ben, arrives at the house, intervenes to help Barbara, and opts to take shelter in the farmhouse. My generation may see this movie as a drop in the bucket today, but the antiquarian in me appreciates pretty much everything about this film. Yes, there are a few moments of corny dialogue, and the pacing may feel a little slow in the second act, but I think this movie has aged a lot better than most films within this decade. A large part of this is due to this movie's subversive nature during its time period. Seeing this movie for the first time even freaked me out to a small extent, so you can imagine how the public reacted to humanoid creatures eating dead body parts, the impressive and realistic makeup and gore effects for the time period, and most appalling of all, a black man being in a prominent role and portrayed as a competent leader around a lot of white people. Yeah, people really didn't appreciate that part of the movie. Good thing we live in 2025 and we don't have to worry about prominent media figures complaining about black people in leading positions in films. Speaking of which, the clear MVP of this entire movie to me is Dwayne Jones as Ben. His performance of the character makes me wish he was my basketball coach or something of the sort. He brings an enormous amount of confidence, authority, and emotion as Ben. You also can't talk about Dwayne Jones as the character and not bring up the elephant in the room. Dwayne Jones is a black man. In fact, he, as far as I know, was the first black man to ever star and be the protagonist in a horror film. His presence functioned as an incredibly hardened form of social commentary during the late 60s. And to me, the funny thing is that according to George Romero,
everyone who was sort of noticing the film was talking about the racial issue. And to us, it wasn't a racial message at all. In fact, we were when we cast Dwayne Jones, when Dwayne Jones agreed to do it, we didn't change the script. And when Jack and I were writing the script, it was the guy in our mind was Caucasian. And that's the stuff that we were thinking.
And you just picked him because he was the best actor you could find.
That's it. Dwayne was the best actor from among our friends.
Dwayne Jones was just the best actor for the role and George Romero wasn't intentionally trying to push themes of racism within the movie? Yeah, right. We all know this was a woke DEI move. That's why this movie flopped at the box office, because it needed to make $100 million in order to break even, because its budget is $125,000 and films need to make 100 times that in order to account for marketing. Jokes aside, not only has this movie aged incredibly well on its own, it created the modern zombie subgenre. I mean, just think, without this film, we wouldn't have The Walking Dead, Shaun of the Dead, Call of Duty Zombies, Resident Evil, World War Z. Hell, the creation of this genre on its own heavily influenced the slasher genre. Along with films like Psycho and Rosemary's Baby, Night of the Living Dead was some of the first horror films to take place in a realistic, relatable setting. Compare this with earlier films like adaptations of Frankenstein, which typically took place in a gothic castle or a mystical laboratory. Night of the Living Dead walked so Michael Myers could also walk. Another highlight of this movie to me are the characters. I think I praised Dwayne Jones as Ben enough, but each character in general really represents something in the overall narrative. Barbara, while suffering from the plague of the damsel in distress, was the perfect character to open this movie with. She functions as the broken, traumatized personality forced into a situation she doesn't know how to handle. However, the criticism of her being essentially dead weight is 100% fair. I mean, even George Romero agreed.
And with Barbara, I fell into the old trap of the damsel in distress. You know, she breaks her shoes, she breaks her heels, she falls, she does everything, and she winds up being catatonic and ineffectual all the way through the movie.
Harry functions as the stubborn, egotistical archetype unwilling to cooperate with Ben, which leads to inner conflict within the group. Even if the message wasn't intentional, the dynamic between a white man refusing to follow orders from an African American truly provided meaningful societal commentary. Tom and Judy may not have been interesting besides being a normal couple, but their fate serves as the ultimate blow that pushes this movie to its most vomit-inducing section. One of my favorite things about this movie is how well it expands its world despite taking place in one isolated area. The news segment of the movie effectively provides additional lore to the ghouls the protagonists have to face. It reminds me of the file system in the Resident Evil games, and I absolutely love how they opted for a sci-fi explanation for the zombies' existence. I also really enjoyed the movie's timeless atmosphere. I was genuinely shocked to find out that this movie's soundtrack wasn't an original composition and was basically stock music. With how well the score amplifies the ever-living dread, you would think the soundtrack was created by a brilliant composer who wrote the music to enhance this film specifically. I mean, just watch the opening scene. As you may have noticed, this movie is black and white, which actually wasn't the norm at this point in time for television. The only reason the film crew opted for black and white was simply because it was cheaper, but I feel as if it's way more of a win for this movie than it is a loss. The black and white effect adds to the looming sense of dread throughout this movie, almost like a PTSD nightmare from a baby boomer. Speaking of nightmare, despite this film's infamous low budget, the gore and makeup for this movie is sensational. So much so that it quite literally had audience members puking while watching the movie. Let's hope these people never saw the Terrifier movies. And the ending. Whoa. That genuinely dumbfounded me on my first reaction to this movie. I mean, it's just like, cause, I mean, it like the way, you just don't like it. Yeah. This movie is an absolute classic and deserves pretty much every bit of praise it gets. Despite its dated dialogue and leisured second act, this movie continues to age like fine wine. It has a healthy progression of action, timeless atmospheric mood, interesting and meaningful characters, and a killer ending. It's one of the most influential horror films of all time and introduced us to one of the most iconic creatures in popular culture. 9 out of 10. A small time after the initial outbreak has begun, despite the government's best practices to fight off the zombie hordes, society is still collapsing and millions of people are reported to have died and returned as these undead animated creatures. Stephen Andrews, a traffic reporter, and his pregnant girlfriend plan to steal the station's helicopter to escape the city. Meanwhile, the Philadelphia SWAT team raids a low-income apartment where the mostly Latino and black residents are refusing to deliver their zombies to be killed. Two of the SWAT officers, Roger and Peter, decide to group up with Stephen, Roger's friend, and escape the city. Alright, everybody knows this movie is arguably the greatest zombie movie of all time. Its plot is far better than its predecessor, zombies are turned up to 11, and its soundtrack is just perfect. Dawn is arguably more influential than Night in almost every single way. While the political messaging in Night was less forthright and more coincidental, this movie delves much deeper into themes about classism, consumerism, and materialism. The symbolic gesture of human bodies subconsciously wandering about the shopping mall to consume their desires presents a much stronger form of social satire. Not only do the zombies themselves elevate this movie's message, but the survivors do as well. They treat the mall setting as a kind of retreat, pocketing money they're most likely never going to be able to use, and exploiting all of the mall's luxuries like arcade games, candy, clothing, jewelry, and weapons, all of a means of distracting themselves from the impending doom that's harming the world. This provides characters like Steven with an unhealthy feeling of ownership, which ultimately leads to his death. It's themes like this that perfected the formula of societal commentary that dominates zombie media. Another crucial form of innovation this film supplies are its groundbreaking practical effects and gore, courtesy of this incredible man right here. Tom Savini began his work as a makeup artist for the 1974 film Deranged, but this movie right here is what put him on the map. Even to this day, I love the grayed out lifeless decor Savini uses for the zombies as much as people shit on them. And the gore in this movie, while a little dated, is genuinely impressive. So much so that I can't even show you most of it without this video getting age restricted. While Night of the Living Dead was the origin of the concept of the modern zombie, Dawn is an example of the subgenre perfected. Instead of the slow progression of action that Night decided to employ, this movie is basically non-stop old school zombie action. This movie single-handedly made me a fan of Dead Rising just because of how fun the action is. I mean, the characters are another one of this movie's highlights. In addition to their importance for this film's message about consumerism, they also just feel very real. The story mainly centers around their methods of cooperation, but also demonstrates their real and relatable inner conflicts. And this movie really set in stone that in an apocalypse, the humans are far more dangerous than the actual virus causing the harm. This idea in particular is incredibly relevant today, from the COVID-19 pandemic to the measles outbreak that's resurfacing. And it's stuff like this that only proves Romero's idea that if a zombie apocalypse were to erode, people like Pierre Corey and Brett Weinstein would be the ones that lead us to extinction. Check out Professor Dave's video if you want to know more. And the performances across the board are incredible. Ken Foray is 100% the MVP for me. Maybe it's just my nigga bias, but he's just the coolest to me.
Granddad was a priest in Trinidad. Used to tell us, when there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth.
In spite of the fact that this movie is the longest in the series, it doesn't waste a single minute. The action-filled sections of this movie are fantastic, and the slower sections of the movie are filled with impeccable dialogue and atmospheric world building. As with every amazing zombie movie, Dawn nails this expansion of the apocalypse. Everything from seeing the National Guard's negligence in exterminating zombies while flying in a helicopter, to live debates about the best course of action to take against the undead, to seeing how zombies are affecting residents in low-income housing projects, adds so much more to this world Romero has created, and gives us a much bigger insight as to how the outbreak is affecting people. George did not know how right he was. The climax may feel a little silly and disjointed in tone, but the incredible kills that follow in addition to Steven's tragic fate make up for it 100%. And the ending isn't anything groundbreaking, but honestly, that's kind of why I like it. It's not a huge conclusion that leaves the character in a more empowered state than before, and it's not an incredibly tragic wind-up like the original ending was, and it's not a gut-wrenching shocker like Ben's murder in Night. It's an ambiguous ending, open to interpretation, and that's really all this movie needed to get its point across. The materialistic fantasy left them with nothing more than temporary relief and strong consequences, but in the end, it's not what saves them. Dawn is definitely one of my favorite horror movies of all time. It's a movie that I can watch over and over, and each watch is just as good as the last. It's the perfect example of what every zombie movie should strive to be: a focus on social commentary, fully realized, multi-layered characters, creative gore and makeup effects, and a baller soundtrack. Dawn is a genre-defining sequel that expands on everything that made the original predecessor great, and is without question George A. Romero's magnum opus. 10 out of 10. The world has been devastated by the zombie apocalypse 7 years after the events of Dawn of the Dead. The scattered remnants of human survivors are greatly outnumbered by the zombie hordes, and the social structure that once protected civilization has largely disappeared. In Florida Everglades, a protected underground missile bunker is home to a small group of scientists and troops. The movie primarily follows Dr. Sarah Bowman, who is under protection by the military, while she and other scientists attempt to develop a solution to the pandemic. So let me just say this, I genuinely think Day of the Dead is a good movie. Put up against Night and Dawn, it's extremely easy to feel disappointed with how this movie came about, and honestly, a lot of it wasn't Romero's fault. Romero had a much larger vision for this movie with a significantly higher scope, but unfortunately, the production company refused to finance this movie with a higher budget if Romero didn't tone down the violence for an R rating as opposed to it being unrated. Romero obviously refused, and this led to him being stuck with a smaller budget than he would have wanted, leading to drastic changes in the script and it feeling quote-unquote malnourished compared to Romero's original plans. It's honestly really sad because if we had gotten Romero's original vision, it probably could have been one of the greatest zombie movies of all time. Given how good Day of the Dead was, despite its huge drawback in the budget, showed that George had a clear and compelling product, and it sucks that we'll never get to see it. But I guess it's just tradition at this point, from the lost true Resident Evil game that seals Umbrella's fate after Code Veronica to the great war map of Call of Duty Zombies, this subgenre is just cursed with lost content that we're never going to be able to see. Anyway, the most glaring flaw of this movie is really just its execution. Like I said before, you can tell Romero had a great idea going with this film. The concept of scientists and soldiers at odds during an extremely low point in civilization in an isolated and claustrophobic setting had so much potential, but due to the unfortunate drawback in the budget, we were left with philosophical themes that don't 100% land, a sluggish second act, limited world building, uneven character work, and a weakened script. Dr. Sarah Bowman and John were the two main characters that I thoroughly enjoyed, and their conversation where John is trying to get her to see his point of view on the whole outbreak is definitely a highlight of this movie to me. I thought Miguel and Bill were kind of just fine. They don't really have too many interesting dynamics to them, and Miguel can be especially frustrating to watch sometimes. But the absolute worst characters in this movie are undoubtedly the soldiers, the commander, and Dr. Frankenstein. They are nothing more than one-note archetypes, with the soldiers being sexist and crude, Commander Rhodes being the aggressive dictatorial captain, and Dr. Frankenstein being, well, Dr. Frankenstein. But we all know the best character in this movie is this undead man right here. Bub is, as far as I know, the first friendly zombie to ever be portrayed in pop culture. He provides this series with a new angle in which to view these creatures and gives one of the worst characters its satisfying comeuppance that I sadly can't show you. And on the topic of the climax, I think this film's third act is absolutely unblemished. It's easily the highlight of this film that makes everything from before worth it. The action is amazing, the gore is incredible, and it's again something we could have had more of if this movie wasn't dialed down. While Dawn put the Godfather of gore on the map, Day is widely considered to be the benchmark for practical effects. Tom Savini and his team went to work for this film's visuals, and it was actually thanks to this movie that the members of K&B Effects, Greg Nicotero, Robert Kirkman, and Howard Berger formed their iconic group, which then went on to be a staple in Hollywood, working on projects like The Walking Dead, Pulp Fiction, and even Scream. You heard that right. If it wasn't for this movie, we wouldn't have this iconic ghost face mask. And as annoying as it was for this movie to be stuck in the shelter the whole time, you have to appreciate how well it plays into the film's concept. Yes, the set pieces may be bleak and lifeless, but they complement the movie's feelings of existential dread, which paved the way for the bunker horror subgenre. Day also does a pretty good job delivering societal reflections like militaristic incompetence, failed leadership, and the dangers of science if moral implications and ethics aren't being taken into account. It's a nice shift from Dawn's theme of consumerism, and is another thing that benefits this movie's depressing tone. In all, Day of the Dead was definitely not the best way to conclude this trilogy, and the excellence of Night and Dawn definitely hampered how people viewed it for the first time. Despite its limited world building, weak dialogue, thin characterization, and underwhelming execution, I think this is a very solid movie. It's far more influential than people give it credit for, has some of the best makeup and gore effects even today, has arguably one of the best climaxes in the franchise, and has a widely stellar soundtrack. This film deserves more credit than it originally received, and has aged surprisingly well decades later. 7 out of 10. The dispersed remnants of human civilization have created a network of safe city-states throughout North America years after the zombie apocalypse. A feudal-style administration oversees one of these areas, located in Pittsburgh's downtown. Fiddler's Green is a luxurious high-rise where the wealthy and influential stay, while the rest of the population lives in despair. This leads to conflict among the wealthier elites and the mercenaries who are tasked with gathering supplies in dangerous zombie-populated areas in order to help the city. Riley Denbo, the leader of the mercenaries, has to clean up this mess, which leads to a huge amount of zombie slang action. Unlike Day of the Dead, this movie is Romero with a budget, and this man did not waste it. While I think Dawn may have had a little more entertaining action, this one is a close second for sure. There's apocalyptic chaos, gunfights, and an enormous amount of zombie slang action courtesy of the Dead Reckoning, a large truck built for the means of taking out zombies. And remember K&B Effects, the group I mentioned earlier? They're responsible for all of the special effects and makeup for the movie. Need I say more? Along with the previous 3 films, Land provides yet another banger of a soundtrack. Every song perfectly reinforces the mood each scene is going for, especially during times of chaos. I also really enjoyed the characters this time around. There are a few throwaways that I don't really care about, but I thought this core cast was a big improvement from Day. Riley is a very likable guy. He may be stern, cold sometimes, but he has a genuine care for those around him, and he genuinely values people's safety. John Leguizamo is as great as always, and he perfectly portrays Cholo as an arrogant, reckless, and cocky mercenary whose get-rich-quick mindset ultimately causes his downfall. Slack isn't a simple damsel in distress, nor is she a cliche badass female archetype. Her past as a prostitute not only adds depth to her character, but does an effective job at presenting a different exploitive side of this apocalyptic world. My favorite character, though, is Charlie. He's just so fucking lovable, man. Like, you can't hate this guy.
I hate going under the river.
You take care of him, huh?
Hell yeah. He pulled me out of the fire. It was bad. Just look at me, you can tell it was bad.
Breathe it.
Not! That hurt! I didn't hurt you!
Land takes place in a heavily fortified Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where the majority of citizens live in the post-apocalyptic broken down streets, and the wealthy citizens in positions of power live in much more comfortable conditions. The setting provides a stark contrast between the high-class elites and the lower-class underprivileged, mirroring the real-life issues of redlining and undersupported ghettos. Paul Kaufman, the federal lord of the community, is a very effective antagonist that greatly benefits the movie's message. Instead of providing help to the community, he seeks to exploit it and uphold his already high power, and his greed and inability to negotiate ultimately leads to his downfall. Honestly, I found this movie's world building to be a step up from Day of the Dead. It still sells that feeling of isolation, but it also delivers the effects of having to adapt to the new normal, and it does it in a way that feels much more relevant, especially today after all the COVID stuff happened. Shit, they even have zombie carnival games, which I found both hilarious and sadly believable. The story itself is tight and focused. The film never feels like it's dragging, overstaying its welcome. I did find the climax to be a little underwhelming, especially since this is the best take on Romero's zombies so far, but Romero never intended for this subgenre to be a huge action blockbuster, so it's hard to count it against this movie. I also felt as if there were a lot of plot elements that felt underexplained and needed more fleshing out, like the rapid evolution of the zombies' intelligence. Yes, that plot point was present in day, but there was a lot more context in that film, and as cool as zombie Eugene Clark was, it felt like a huge leap in continuity. But despite those setbacks, this movie was a fun ride. Romero delivered a fresh, evolved take on the franchise that I found extremely entertaining. The characters were much more interesting this time around. The film does not waste its budget. It, along with its predecessors, delivers meaningful, relevant social commentary, and it doesn't waste a single minute. 7.5 out of 10.
Reporting live from Homestead, where tragedy befell an immigrant family. An unidentified man has shot his wife and 16-year-old son to death before turning the gun on himself.
What the fuck is that?
Jesus.
What?
Editor Gavante here. Any footage showing Diary of the Dead is going to look heavily filtered because the production company or the people who own this movie right now is very, very strict when it comes to copyright claiming this. So I'm just doing what I have to do to avoid that. So sorry the footage looks as bad as it does. I promise not all of these movies are going to look like this. At the entry point of the zombie outbreak, a group of film students give up on their horror project as they struggle to live and travel in search of relatives and a safe haven. They start recording the event with their cameras while juggling their responsibilities as journalists and survivors. This, to me, is where the series started to dramatically decline in quality. As you may have seen online, this movie is pretty divided among the audience, and I lean far more towards the negative than I really want to. I mean, this movie had a really good concept going for it. This is a found footage horror movie, primarily being filmed through the protagonist's digital camera. I appreciate the angle Romero was going for, but much like Day, this movie's idea far surpasses its execution. For one, I will tell you, this movie has aged worse than almost every other movie in this franchise. While this movie is primarily told through clips on Jason's camera, it's narrated by his girlfriend Deborah, and this just breaks immersion for me. For example, the opening scene presents a pretty decent opening of news camera footage where a reporter is covering a murder-suicide, only for the corpses to come back alive and start causing havoc. It's not a bad way to open this film, but Deborah's narration breaks any subtlety that this footage could have provided.
We downloaded this video off the net sometime over the last 3 days. I can't remember exactly when.
I don't need her to tell me that the broadcasting networks are trying to cover up the effects of the outbreak. I don't need her to pause certain sections of the movie to tell me what's going on. And I don't need her to tell me that what's going to happen next is really, really bad. Just show. Don't tell. This film also has a soundtrack over it, which I didn't like. I mean, the music itself is fine, but again, this is supposed to be a found footage horror movie, and it's hard for me to feel like I'm watching real, authentic, undiscovered footage when someone is not only narrating over it the entire time, but there's also music over it.
I've added music occasionally for effect, hoping to scare you. You see, in addition to trying to tell you the truth, I am hoping to scare you.
Another huge problem with this movie are the characters. This movie has some of the most uninteresting, generic characters in the franchise so far. Jason is the stereotypical film first, help later character. Deborah is just the you shouldn't be doing that girl until the end where she's pro recording traumatic events because truth. The only character that I really felt anything for was Mary. She may be a bit cliche, but the guilt she carried for accidentally killing the zombies felt believable, and her attempted suicide was a very meaningful way to kick off this movie, especially for its time. Everybody else just fell flat for me, and the dialogue among them just felt forced. Diary's story is nothing special. It's basically the same idea as Night of the Living Dead through a modernized lens. A group of survivors deal with internal conflicts as they try to navigate the beginning of the zombie outbreak and the societal collapse. This was something I found very confusing because George is on record saying that while his films aren't direct sequels to one another, they all take place in the same universe during the same outbreak. but that clearly doesn't work for this film because it presents the outbreak as if it just happened, meaning it would have to take place around the same time as Night, which took place during the late 60s. So this film is a kind of soft reboot to the timeline rather than sequels to the original 4 films. The reboot itself isn't really a problem with this movie, but as a reboot it fails to reinvent the formula in a compelling way, and as a loose sequel it doesn't expand the universe that much. The movie itself was also just very uneventful. Zombies take more of a back seat than they did in Romero's previous movies, which isn't necessarily a problem, but that means the movie spends most of the time with its human characters, and as I stated before, they're not really that interesting. This movie also isn't really scary, so that means this movie doesn't have any cool action, doesn't have a suspenseful present anxiety, has flat, boring characters, and the cast doesn't really deliver strong performances. The climax was also something that I thought was complete nonsense. So Jason and the rest of the crew who have survived head to his rich friend's house for safety. Luckily, the mansion has this secret safe room filled with security cameras. Unfortunately, it turns out that not only was his rich friend bitten, there are a host of other zombies that has occupied his pool. Once the remaining survivors group up, you think it would be common sense to head into the panic room for safety. But Jason decides, no, he's not going to stay in the panic room because it's better to record the effects of the outbreak on the outside world. Now, it's not this alone that I have a problem with. Jason has made a point this whole movie that recording the events of the zombie outbreak has been his #1 priority. Even if this decision is pretty ridiculous, it falls in line with his characterization. What irks me is that Jason made the argument that the crew is armed with weapons so they can handle anything that comes their way. But for some reason, he decides to go wander about the mansion alone without anything to protect himself, knowing damn well that 2 of his friends in the mansion have just been infected. I can empathize with Jason's passion for documenting this event that is dramatically affecting the world, but you still have to be alive if you want to tell it. And I want to remind you guys, this panic room has security cameras, meaning that you don't need to leave the room if you want to catch crazy shit that's happening around the mansion. And the film just ends with Jason dying, Deborah and the rest of the crew hiding in the panic room like intelligent people, and Deborah delivering a corny monologue. As negative as I may sound about this movie, I truly don't hate it, and strangely over time I have learned to appreciate the good things about it way more. As I said before, I really dig the concept that this movie is going for, and I really appreciate Romero's attempt to tackle social commentary through a new lens. It's something you have to appreciate about this franchise, as every movie uses the zombie subgenre through different generations of film. There are also certain parts of this movie that I really liked. For example, once the crew head to the mansion, we sometimes view the movie through the security cameras around the house. I really enjoyed this. It delivers some of the best atmosphere in this found footage film. It reminds me of the fixed camera angles in the classic Resident Evil games and makes you feel like you're actually watching something that you weren't meant to see. While I did feel a lot of the set pieces were lacking, I really enjoyed the hospital area. Granted, hospitals are the easier locations to deliver an eerie atmosphere, but I really liked the way it was shot, and I thought it was a good idea to see our first set of zombies here. So, there are some things to appreciate about this movie, but overall, it fumbles its execution. Diary was incredibly ambitious in its approach to media chaos, digital narcissism, and cover-ups, but its story was bland, the characters weren't interesting enough, and it fails as both a reboot and a loose sequel. I think a found footage zombie movie can absolutely work. I mean, look no further than Wreck, which came out that same year. That movie told almost all the same messages that Romero was trying to get across in this film, but the characters were far more intriguing, the plot didn't waste any time, and the movie did a great job delivering suspense. This movie, however, fell short for me and is definitely the weakest movie in this franchise so far. So I will have to give Diary of the Dead an unfortunate 3.5 out of 10. Shortly after the events of Diary, a group of National Guard members find an island home to 2 rival Irish families with diametrically opposed views on the undead. The Muldoons, who preserve their undead relatives, and the O'Flynns, who wish to eradicate all zombies. As the 2 families argue over how to handle the zombie epidemic, the movie examines their conflict, which existed before the pandemic. So, I'm just going to be straight up and tell you, this is the worst movie in the series. It is unapologetically bad. The plot of this movie is somehow even worse than Diary. The characters are just as flat and forgettable, and has arguably the worst third act in the series. I believe Romero was attempting to explore the dangers of tribalism and stubbornness, which parallels the real-world feud between the US Senate and the Middle East. Just like with Diary, I believe the concept itself is fine and has great potential for a zombie movie. The execution just falls flat for me. First off, this may just be my personal taste, but I'm not really a huge fan of the Western approach Romero took for this film. It just gives the movie a more cartoony feel, and the abysmal CGI as opposed to practical effects only enhance this parody-like feeling. This hurts any and all tension this movie is trying to create, and it makes the movie feel like an entirely different franchise. It also doesn't help that almost no characters in this movie are interesting at all. I mean, Janet O'Flynn was kind of interesting, and I thought her contribution to her father's character growth was meaningful, but other than her, the only other character I somewhat cared about was Boy, and that's just because this nigga is obviously Roderick. As I stated before, I think the whole tribe versus tribe concept where both sides have completely different views of the zombies isn't inherently bad for this genre, but I think having two cartoony Irishmen be at the center of the conflict just ruined the whole zombie learning arc for me. There are much better ways to present the issues of the everlasting conflict among two sides who refuse to compromise than this. For example, in the Resident Evil series, STARS, the Special Tactic and Rescue Service, view the creation of zombies as a threat to humanity, while Umbrella, the negligent pharma company, views zombies as a mere byproduct to the creation of a super soldier. This led to great conflict between the two, which led to things like Wesker, a member of STARS, trying to cover up for the organization, and Carlos, a man who works for the Umbrella Corporation, teaming up with a member of STARS to try and fix the mistake his company created. Dynamics like this perpetuate the importance of unity in a time of apocalypse, and can absolutely carry your zombie story if you do it well. This movie, on the other hand, fumbled that idea, and that, combined with the forgettable, mundane characters, ultimately makes this movie a failure. I touched on the CGI earlier, and let me just tell you, it's really bad in Survival. This wasn't entirely on Romero, as he did have a surprisingly small budget for this film, but it's just another thing about this movie that makes it feel disconnected from the rest of the franchise. The visuals for this movie are also just incredibly stale and lack any atmosphere. Diary at least had locations like the hospital and the mansion, which evoked some sense of mood. I couldn't tell you a single location in this film that gave me any sense of visceral emotion. A small amount of things about the movie that I could give it credit for is that its first half was kind of okay. It's not a good job by any means, but it does a decent job at setting up every character and plot point in the film, giving some occasional burst of fun action, and showing very few glimpses of Romero's old practical effects. Once the crew get to the island, however, the movie goes from a 5 to a 1. And has you just begging for the movie to just end the whole time. The second half of the movie is filled with more dialogue and attempts at social commentary, and the film fails at both of these elements. The third act especially is trying its damnedest to deliver a meaningful societal critique, but again, the cartoonish tone this film employs ruins it and provides a weak emotional payoff. Survival, much like the previous installment in the franchise, also fails to expand this universe in any meaningful way. While the film does employ themes of exploitation and humanization among the zombies, Day and Land already deliver both of those ideas, and it being a direct sequel to Diary, which essentially rebooted the timeline, it doesn't add anything to the universe that wasn't set in stone in Night of the Living Dead. So, while this movie showed glimpses of Romero's practical effects, fun action, interesting character work, dialogue, and attempts at social commentary, it ultimately drops the ball in pretty much every way. This movie is where many of the fans gave up on the franchise, and while it's far from the worst zombie movie ever made, we'll get to a couple of them later, it's still definitely the weakest entry in the franchise. 3 out of 10. While Romero didn't succeed with every single film in the franchise, one thing about the series you have to respect is that every movie tackles a subgenre through a different generation of social commentary and filmmaking. Night is the old school black and white horror film that unintentionally provided themes involving race and social upheaval. Dawn is the more chaotic zombie film presenting issues involving consumerism. Day involves issues related to militarism and Cold War dread, setting in stone the bunker horror subgenre. Land represents class divide and urban paranoia, and a classic mid-2000s vibe, Diary is the found footage take on the subgenre that represents digital narcissism and media chaos, and Survival is the Western-flavored film in the franchise that teaches the dangers of a failure to cooperate and compromise. Every film delivered Romero's ideal of how zombie movies are more than just running around and shooting brainless infected creatures for an audience's entertainment, and are instead the window dressing for issues that mimic society in the real world. Even if Diary and Survival concluded the franchise on a bad note, there's still things to appreciate about them, and 4 out of 6 wins in a franchise is a success by any metric, period. And apparently the true final of the Dead movie is still in the works, but who knows what the quality of that film will be. But since we're done with this series created by the iconic father of zombies, let's tackle the remakes. I know there are multiple spin-offs, re-edits, and loose sequels to the franchise, but for the purpose of this video, we'll just be focusing on 4 of these remakes. The 1990s Night of the Living Dead, Snyder's Dawn of the Dead, the 2008 remake of Day of the Dead, and the 2017 remake titled Day of the Dead Bloodline. Without further ado, let's get into it. With basically the same premise as the original, this film, directed by Tom Savini, serves to be an updated remake of the original film. And as a remake, I would say this film is an absolute slam dunk. Almost every gripe I had with the original Night is improved in this version, and the film makes sure to stick to what made the original work. Firstly, the most glaring improvement in this remake is Barbara. Instead of being the traumatized damsel in distress, she's more proactive this time around. After the opening in which her brother is killed, she overcomes her initial shock and actively participates in making decisions and protecting the house. She's so driven, in fact, that instead of being killed by her brother after whining nonstop, she is actually the one who survives in the end. It's very obvious that Romero took the criticism of Barbara to heart and wanted her to have more agency. Barbara's improvement in this story tangentially boosts the first act as well, as it's able to get to the point much faster, and Barbara's more driven attitude makes her much more entertaining to follow. Ben is basically the same as he was in the original, which I was very happy with, as he was my favorite character in that film, and Tony Todd perfectly emulates the authoritative archetype that Dwayne Jones displayed in the original. Rest in peace, man. The cast in general felt like a huge step up from the original. Everyone is giving their all into each of these characters, opposed to the original, where the corniness could be a bit distracting for modern times. Another one of my favorite things about this movie is its aesthetic. It gives me a Resident Evil remake type of feel, and the soundtrack, like almost every other Romero film, perfectly honors the mood. And being a Tom Savini directed film, you can expect competent makeup and effects from this movie, even if it doesn't get as gross as you may expect from a film led by him. While the second act of the original was more filled with exposition and dated dialogue, this film's second act delivers much of the same dynamics among the characters, while also being slightly more action heavy, giving us scenarios like the crew attempting to fortify the house while zombies are trying to barge in. This film retains that ambiguity among the sudden outbreak. However, I do kind of wish they expanded more with the zombie mythos this time around. As slow as the second act may feel in the original, one of my favorite parts of that movie was the section where everyone is watching the news, delivering intriguing lore and the effects of the outbreak while retaining that sense of claustrophobia. In this film, that element is kind of there, but not nearly enough as I would have wanted it to be. Regardless, the second act is another step up from the original in terms of modernizing the formula. It keeps that progression of tension and action that horror films have seemed to lose nowadays. The third act is where I think this film starts to lose me a bit. For one, as much as I felt Barbara was a huge upgrade in terms of being more proactive, I 100% empathize with the perspective that her surviving at the end of this movie felt too neat. You might be tired of me comparing this remake to the original so much, but that's because up until this point, I have appreciated pretty much every deviation and modernization from it thus far. However, the tragic ending of the original is something incredibly shocking even by today's standards. It doesn't end like Dawn, where the character's survival at the end is at least left ambiguous, nor is it like Day, where we know the characters make it somewhere safe. The original Night did a great job kicking you in the gut and refusing to give you the happy ending you may have wanted. Even if Ben still dies dies in this version, and even if the events of the story are still traumatic, having Barbara, the co-protagonist, triumph over Harry, the spiteful, selfish antagonist, removes the punch the original film's conclusion possessed. And Barbara killing Harry the way that she did at the end of the film just felt too silly for me. On the other hand, I do appreciate how bold the ending is trying to be, and can respect the remake giving us a different conclusion, as just giving us the same thing the original had wouldn't have been very shocking anyway. Overall, this movie was great as both a film and a remake. It modernizes the original while mostly retaining its strengths. The character work and the dialogue are a great step up from the original, and while the final stretch didn't exactly hit home for me, the first and second act were a blast to sit through. I'm honestly surprised this film isn't really respected among the general audience. Night of the Living Dead may not have been a film that needed to be remade, but in terms of content, it absolutely delivers. 8 out of 10. After escaping her zombie husband, Anna, a nurse in Wisconsin, Milwaukee, joins a band of survivors who seek safety in a big suburban mall. While battling the swarms of frantic zombies outside, they attempt to establish a semblance of normality indoors. While both this remake and the original involve a group of survivors taking refuge in a mall, that's where the similarities end, as this movie features a completely different story, a brand new set of characters, and much more aggressive zombies. If you have heard anything about this film, you most likely have seen unanimous praise regarding this film's opening, and let me just tell you, it deserves every bit of it. The quick transition from a mundane, calming suburb to a violent, chaotic apocalypse completely breaks the sense of safety for both the audience and the characters. And as stated before, the film opts for fast, sprinting zombies opposed to Romero's slow, shambling zombies, and this only elevates the sudden feeling of danger, effectively raising the stakes right from the start. The camera work is also very Zack Snyder. It's shaky without being distracting, and the rapid editing does a phenomenal job of creating panic within the audience. After following the beginning of Anna's chaos, we're thrust into what is arguably the best title sequence in a zombies movie. Johnny Cash's "The Man Comes Around" starts playing as the audience is subjected to news clips showing the global outcome of the zombie outbreak. Within just the first 15 minutes or so, the movie establishes the threat these zombies impose on the characters, demonstrates that institutions are failing to contain this outbreak on a mass scale, and introduces us to our main set of protagonists that are going to be important for the rest of the movie. The hook factor is definitely this movie's strongest attribute. Zack Snyder's signature cinematography is present throughout the entirety of the movie, and it's something that I think benefits this film more than most of his other projects. Snyder's use of high contrast lighting and muted color palettes and color grading superbly complement this movie's dark and gritty tone. As stated before, the restless pacing zombies mixed with Snyder's speed ramping make for a perfect set of intense zombie action. This movie especially has possibly the best zombie action in cinema. Snyder chose to stick with more practical makeup effects opposed to something like World War Z, which uses more CGI, and the extent at which the undead chaos unfolds is exceptional. There are suburban war zones, underground chase sequences, large-scale zombie explosions, and adrenaline-inducing horde assaults. The third act in particular is explosive, bloody, and exhilarating, pretty much everything you would want from a zombie movie. The soundtrack is another highlight of this film. Everything from Johnny Cash's "The Man Comes Around," Disturbed's "Down with the Sickness," and Tyler Bates' composition creates an evocative, unique atmosphere that coats this movie excellently. The film even has Richard Cheese in on the soundtrack, and we all know that Richard Cheese is the undisputed GOAT. In contrast to the original film, where the audience mainly follows 4 characters, the remake introduces us to way more. The standouts for me are Anna, played by Sarah Polley, Michael, played by Jack Weber, and Kenneth, played by the GOAT, Ving Rhames. Anna, the protagonist, is the emotional core of the group, being a nurse in the area. She's very protective of everyone around her and tries to save as many people as possible, regardless of the danger it may put herself in. She's very proactive in this regard, in contrast to somebody like Barbara in the original Night of the Living Dead. Michael is the reluctant hero dealing with the divorce of his wife and the loss of his child before the outbreak. The sudden apocalypse gives him a significant arc, learning to love and protect again. Kenneth, while seemingly for himself for the majority of the movie, serves as the big guy for the group, somebody that others can rely on for their protection. Kenneth also deals with an emotional struggle, battling with the inability to reunite with his brother and a fictional army base called Fort Pastor. He instead finds a significant connection with the nearby gun store owner, Andy, giving the film small moments of emotional relief, emphasizing the importance of companionship and the fundamental need for human connection. Other than them, I thought Nicole, CJ, and his two co-workers were solid additions to the movie, but this movie could definitely benefit from a less bloated set of characters. Excluding Andy, the gun store owner, the crew in this movie consists of 16 survivors, many of whom died at some point, and I felt like the movie could have benefited without most of them. The problem is, when you have such an overrepresentation of survivors in apocalyptic movies like this, you're almost never going to be able to expand on all of them and represent each of them with the same level of importance. Compare this with something like Night or even the original Dawn, where both groups each had a purpose among every single one of the characters. This movie has an obvious focus on Anna, Michael, and Kenneth. Characters like CJ and his crew, Nicole and her father are meaningful for the story, even if less so, but I feel like everyone else are kind of just wasted space and their attributes could have easily been given to other characters. Andre and his pregnant girlfriend are present too, but I didn't find the whole baby zombie element to be too interesting, and both of them end up dying midway through the second act anyway. Another striking issue with this movie is its reduced thematic weight. Compared to the original, this movie's social commentary, particularly about consumerism, is significantly downplayed in this film. The mall setting is mainly a place of shelter opposed to a critique of American consumer culture. There are some on-the-nose messages, such as CJ's power-abusing behavior and the importance of cooperation and companionship in moments of disaster, but the remake far prioritizes its action pieces and fast-paced scares in opposition to developing a deeper narrative. And just to reiterate, the frantic scares and large-scale action sequences are fantastic, and I don't think many people disagree with that. It's just the lack of ideological depth removes a lot of the meaning that made the original so iconic, and choosing to place emphasis on the action side of the zombie subgenre is not only one of Romero's biggest critiques of this film, but modern zombie films in general. Those are really my two biggest criticisms of this film, in addition to the pacing dragging a bit in the middle, but they don't even come close to ruining the greatest things about this movie. Gunn's script and Snyder's cinematography is unmatched. This movie was a very thrilling experience and kept me tremendously satisfied. The zombie action in this movie is unparalleled, the soundtrack is strong and captivating, the visual flair is classic Snyder, the gore and creature work are brutal and immersive, the cast and characters were great, and the opening is one of the best in horror. Dawn 2004 is easily my favorite Snyder film of all time, and my favorite remake of a Romero zombie film. 8.5 out of 10. So let me just rip the band-aid off and tell you, this movie is bad. Like, really bad. I'm talking mid-2000s direct-to-DVD bad. Poor lighting, shitty makeup and effects, and an abysmal script. Don't believe me?
What the hell you looking at? I know you're not looking at her ass.
Yeah, that's basically the whole movie. A small Colorado town is placed under a military quarantine following a flu-like outbreak that turns the afflicted into rabid flesh-eating zombies. It should go without saying that this movie has almost no similarities between the original, besides the concept of having a friendly zombie. His name isn't even Bub in this movie, he's called Bud, but let's not get there yet. The important characters in this remake are Corporal Sarah Cross Bowman, played by Mana Savari, her brother Trevor, played by Michael Welch, his girlfriend Nina, played by Annalyn McCord, Private Bud Crane, the vegetarian zombie, played by Stark Sands, Private Salazar, played by Nick Cannon, and Dr. Logan, one of the film's main antagonists, played by Matt Rippey. There is also Captain Kenneth Rhodes, played by Ving Rhames, in a completely unrelated role from the Dawn remake, but he's kind of a nothing character other than being the leader of Sarah's military unit, and he just gets killed by zombies within the first few minutes of the outbreak anyway. Sarah, the central protagonist of the film, is a soldier, a part of Captain Rhodes' military unit. Her main purpose in this story is to navigate her unit and her brother throughout the outbreak and uncover the secrets surrounding it. That's all there is to her character. She's pretty by the books. She doesn't go through any character development or growth at all. Her brother Trevor and his girlfriend Nina are your typical teenage archetype in a horror movie. Horny, stupid, scared, and absurdly cringe. Private Salazar is played by comedian Nick Cannon, and let me just say, I love Nick Cannon. Wild 'N Out is one of my favorite TV shows ever, but his performance in this movie is awful.
I heard about you. You and the homie Henry Fenton was hitting it for a couple months, right?
I can't even blame him too much because the script in general is really bad, and his character is nothing more than the token black guy, and not what Eric July thinks a token black guy is. I mean, he literally checks all the boxes. Sidekick to the white protagonist with no development of his own? Check. Exclusively exists to lighten the mood and deliver comic relief? Check. An emotionally reserved, cocky badass who is rarely vulnerable, afraid, or conflicted? Check. Sacrificing himself so the white protagonist can have a chance to succeed? Check. Dr. Logan is the corrupt, irresponsible scientist whose experimental scientific work leads to the outbreak, and he and his team try their best to cover up their mistake. Yeah, because that's never been done before. Last and arguably least, we have Private Bud. He exists as the Bub archetype in the original film, the friendly zombie who helps the non-infected. Now, did he become a zombie and get trained by a mad scientist like in the original film? No. This film's explanation as to why he's a friendly zombie is because he is a vegetarian. I am not joking.
Ridiculous. I mean, why Thriller over here ain't trying to eat us?
He's a vegetarian.
That's the best explanation you can come up with?
You got a better one?
This explanation is extremely stupid because 1, shouldn't he be eating grass and shit? Zombies still hungry, don't they? Bub in the original still needed to be fed in order to cooperate properly, and 2, he has a significant amount of memory left over. Zombie Bud still knows that he has a crush on Sarah and still knows to help the crew against the rest of the zombies. Being a vegetarian doesn't explain why he still has a significant portion of his brain power unless they're trying to suggest that being a vegetarian makes you smarter, and that's obviously not true. Oh. Well, you learn something new every day, I guess. I also think this movie has very stupid zombies in general. This movie, like the Dawn remake, opts for the fast, shambling zombies to make the film a lot more chaotic. That's all fine and dandy, but these zombies also have super strength, speed, agility, and I kid you not, Spider-Man wall crawling powers. This is ridiculous enough on its own, but what may be even more ridiculous is the fact that Sarah, her brother, and his girlfriend actually survived this. As stated before, the dialogue in this movie is just horrible. It sounds like it was written by the people who made Riverdale, and the humor almost never lands. I think this joke was the only time the movie actually got me to laugh.
Anyways, there were missiles and there had to be missile silos. We'll find one of those and we'll have our escape route.
Hey, what happened to Fuckface?
And as far as I know, that may not have even been a joke to begin with. The real humor in this movie stems from its shitty CGI and practical effects. Let me show you a scene that legitimately had me dying of laughter. The editing in this movie also makes it impossible to take seriously. Like I said before, it's pure mid-2000s direct-to-DVD energy, so expect shaky cam, rapid cuts, and poor transitions. As far as the movie's story and plot are concerned, they're not any better. Like I said in the beginning, this movie has absolutely nothing to do with the original at all. You would think they'd share the stuck in a bunker theme, but nope. Completely different story with a completely different setting. Honestly, I don't even know why this movie is called Day of the Dead, nor why it's considered a remake, other than to get Romero fans to purchase the movie. And needless to say, that didn't work. Basically, the zombie outbreak started because of some careless scientists, and the military has to come into this town in Colorado to quarantine it. Sarah teams up with Bud and heads to meet her sick mother. She takes her family to the nearby crowded hospital where Dr. Logan asks her some questions, and soon after, the outbreak begins. After narrowly escaping the Spider-Man zombies, Nina and Trevor seek shelter in a nearby radio station. Sarah and Bud meet up with Dr. Logan and Salazar in one of the closets in the hospital. They leave the building through a window, fight off a couple of zombies. Dr. Logan leaves them. Sarah and the rest of the group head to the radio station to pick up her brother. Bud becomes a zombie. Bud becomes a zombie. They find Dr. Logan, discover the secrets of the outbreak. Salazar dies and the rest of the group escapes. Yeah, this movie is not very ambitious when it comes to its story and plot. There is no clear structure, there are tons of sections with abysmal editing and narrative progression, and no moments of attempted thematic depth or social commentary. This movie was a bit of a chore to sit through, but I find it kind of fun. It's one of those movies that's so bad on every level of filmmaking that it's actually kind of enjoyable. The script is so cheesy that it's actually really funny, and the effects are so bad they legitimately had me dying at certain parts. As bad as it was shot, I actually liked the laboratory set design at the end of the movie, and the music, while ruined by the horrible quality, is at least passable. If you have the ability to turn your brain off and just treat this movie like zombie-themed background noise, it might actually be an enjoyable movie to make fun of at a get-together or something. So in all, I'm going to give this movie a 1.5 out of 10.
Reporting. ADSX, Colorado County.
This movie is yet another attempt at a remake of Day of the Dead made by the same production company as the last one. This movie at least tries to stick to the original in terms of the bunker setting and scientists clashing with military personnel, but don't get your hopes up because this movie isn't much better. I mean, it presents decent zombie makeup and effects, a marginally better script than the last remake, and a few decent set pieces and camera moves, but none of that makes up for how disrespectful this film is as both a remake and a standalone project. This movie stars, no one you'll remember, a paper-thin script, generic zombie action, and horribly delivered thematic depth. 5 years after the zombie outbreak, a group of survivors live in an underground bunker where Zoe, a medical student, thinks she might find a cure. A zombified version of Max, her previous tormentor, has acquired some human traits and still harbors an odd fixation on her. He is her last hope. However, the already strained community is in danger of being torn apart by his presence. You heard that right. The bub character in this movie not only has an uncomfortable obsession with the protagonist like the last remake, he's also a rapist. Not only is this borderline offensive from an adaptation standpoint, it's also just incredibly uncomfortable.
You like feeling my touch?
Ugh. Our important characters this time around are Zoe Parker, the film's protagonist, Max, the zombie rapist, Lieutenant Miguel Salazar, who was in the original, his brother Baca Salazar, who was in a romantic relationship with Zoe, and Lily, a little girl who really needs medicine. This is one of the few things I can give this movie credit for, as it at least has the decency to emulate the concept of the original movie to a certain extent. However, while Dr. Sarah Bowman was an intriguing, likable character who was easy to root and care for, Zoe is an uninteresting, incompetent mess. Firstly, the movie tries to sell this idea that Zoe is smart. I mean, she is seemingly the only scientist capable of developing a revolutionary cure, but pretty much all she does is make stupid decisions that get people around her killed. For example, after Lily comes down with bacterial pneumonia, Zoe urges Miguel to send her and her team to obtain medicine where zombies are likely to be. Miguel reluctantly sends them, and they arrive, get the medicine as planned, and they head out. And let me just pause here to say, all things considered, I actually like the hospital setting. Like I said in my diary review, it's one of the easiest locations to instill that sense of present anxiety in horror films, but I really like the way it was shot, and it's one of the few times that I didn't despise the camera work in the movie. The stupid part comes when the team gets the medicine and starts to leave. Zoe decides to get some of her old supplies from the epidemiology office. That's fine, she is a scientist after all. But she, for some reason, goes off on her own and never warns her team despite being right next to them, and this leads to her getting chased by a zombie, causing all sorts of commotion, which then alerts the other zombies, and once her group reunites with her, one of her team members get killed by a zombie. And even worse, during the scuffle, Zoe drops her hair tie, which then notifies the zombified version of Max to her presence, and once the rest of Zoe's team escapes, Max crawls under their car, which leads them directly to their military base. Oh, but the stupidity does not end there. Max manages to sneak into the military base after killing more people. He eventually corners Zoe and attacks her until her friends end up saving her. Right when her team is about to kill him, Zoe stops them and says that she needs him for her scientific breakthrough, and she keeps Max trapped in what appears to be her office or something of the sort. Now, considering this does lead to her creating the protective vaccine later on, this may not seem like a bad decision on its own, but let me break this down for you. From a Watsonian perspective, she has no idea that Max is the breakthrough she's been looking for. Her hypothesis that Max's unique transformation could help her save others is just that, a hypothesis. A hypothesis that doesn't justify threatening the safety of everyone else in the military bunker. And on top of that, not only does everyone else know that Max is dangerous based on the fact that he is a literal zombie, but Zoe knows the full extent of how dangerous he really is. Keeping him alive in this base that can barely contain normal zombies is a very irresponsible move on her part. So, from a Doylist perspective, this is just something the movie has to do in order to move the plot. And even if this decision did lead to the creation of a vaccine, it contributed to multiple deaths that, as far as we know, she is never held responsible for. And Zoe doesn't even come clean about her past with Max and why he is much more of a threat than everyone initially thought. The only reason this was eventually figured out was because Miguel saw that Zoe's name is carved onto Max's arm, and when her boyfriend Baca rightfully questions her about not coming clean with her history with Max, she gets mad at him for it and uses her past negative trauma against him when all he is trying to do is protect the base. It's not necessarily that all of these decisions aren't believable or realistic, though that would be a fair criticism. It's just that with all of these questionable decisions and actions she displays, it's hard to root for her as a protagonist, and makes Miguel, who's supposed to be the same kind of character as he was in the original, seem far more in the right than the script wants him to be. Editor Gavante here. This was a mistake on my part. Miguel Salazar in Bloodline is not supposed to be the same character that he was in the original. He's actually supposed to be Captain Henry Rhodes from the original. I don't know why they wouldn't just copy the same character over, since Miguel Salazar in Bloodline and Captain Henry Rhodes are clearly supposed to be the same people with damn near the same personality. But either way, this is a mistake on my part. Miguel Salazar in Bloodline is not supposed to be the same character that he was in the original. My bad. I mean, getting upset at Zoe for causing the death of multiple people, bringing a zombie inside this protected military base, not coming clean about her past with said zombie, and putting tons of people's lives in danger, makes Miguel seem like a lieutenant with genuine concern about the safety of those around him, opposed to the self-centered version of the character in the original who abandons his team to protect himself. Baca and the rest of Zoe's friends are extremely bare bones. We barely get any time with these characters, and when some of them do eventually die, because of Zoe's reckless behavior, I don't feel anything for him. On top of having flat, unlikable characters, this movie is also just very boring. Much like the original, we rarely ever leave the military base to explore more areas, which leaves us with barely any opportunity to expand the world. And while I did criticize the original for this very thing, I feel as if this movie is even more sinful in this regard, not only because the original was a sequel to 2 films that already established this world, but because this movie had almost double the budget of the original. This movie was given $8 million, the same budget Romero would have wanted for the original day. And what did this movie do with it? Jack shit. They had significantly better effects and way better action while being released 3 decades before this one and having only half of the budget. And it's another thing that bothers me, because the most enjoyable parts of this movie to me are when we're not confined in the bunker the whole time. I didn't really care for the medical center at the beginning of the movie, but the opening scene, which takes place right after the apocalypse starts and revisiting the medical center 5 years later, were some of the best parts of this movie to me. They still aren't shot the best, especially the intro, which has worse camera skills than a world star slapboxing video, but it's much better than this dull generic bunker where almost nothing interesting happens in it besides Max causing havoc. So this movie not only fails as a remake by disrespecting the premise, characters, and overall story, but it also fails as a standalone film. The script is horrible, the acting is horrible, the story is boring, uneventful, and frustrating, the characters are dull and insufferable, the action scenes are filmed horrendously, and they ruin Bub. Again, but way worse this time. This movie should have never been made. It's blatantly pissing on Romero's grave, has terrible direction, a mediocre cast, and the only thing that puts this one above the Last Day of the Dead remake is that it at least tries to stick to the original formula. There are a few moments that demonstrate a grain of effort, and it looks a little better, but it was far more of a chore to sit through, because the last remake was at least so bad and corny that it was enjoyable to some extent. Day of the Dead Bloodline feels like a film made by somebody who hates Romero's guts, and they should be ashamed of themselves for ruining such a classic film in this fashion. 2.5 out of 10. Please Don't watch this fucking movie. Well, we certainly didn't end on a good note there, but luckily we can get to the actual ranking now, where I can order all of the 10 films from worst to best in terms of how much I like them as films. Without further ado,
Hear the music.
Number 10, Day of the Dead 2008. Exhibit A of how not to construct a remake of a classic film. This reimagining wastes its talented cast with its corny dialogue, low production value, incoherent plot, choppy editing, and shaky cam, and it ruined one of the most iconic zombie characters of all time. It's pure mid-2000 direct-to-DVD energy, which honestly may make it fun to watch if you're into that sort of thing, but as a film, this movie fails at every avenue of filmmaking, and should have been enough to tell this production company to stop trying to remake Romero movies. Number 9, Day of the Dead Bloodline. Exhibit B of how not to construct a remake of a classic film. Basically the same issues as the previous remake, only it's less enjoyable this time around, as this movie takes itself far more seriously than it thinks it is. While the script is marginally better, it has decent makeup and effects, and I like the eerie hospital section. This movie was a monotonous experience that I hope I never have to go through again with a zombie movie. Number 8, Survival of the Dead. Definitely the weakest entry in the Romero franchise to me. There were a couple of characters that I thought were kind of interesting, and the first half up until they get to the island was fine, but then the already weak premise falls immediately on its head. The whole zombie learning arc was not only something not new for this franchise, but it's done especially poorly in this installment. The Western approach Romero took for this film made it far too cartoony to take seriously. This movie has an over-reliance on CGI opposed to the incredible practical effects in Romero's previous movies, and despite being a sequel to the reboot of this franchise, it doesn't expand the world in any meaningful way. This is where a lot of fans gave up on Romero as a film director, and sadly, I feel as if they were justified in doing so. Number 7, Diary of the Dead. This movie had a great concept going for itself, and it had an opportunity to present the zombie outbreak through a different age of film, but unfortunately, this movie does not deliver that idea very well. The characters aren't very interesting, and since zombies take more of a back seat than they usually would in a Romero movie, we're left with an unsatisfying product. Diary isn't very ambitious when it comes to its story, and as much as I respect the swing into found footage horror, this movie does not provide enough justice for that subgenre either. There are extremely glaring dumb character moments, and functioning as a reboot for the franchise, it doesn't expand the universe, nor does it provide something new besides the new age take on zombies. Despite all the negatives, I don't hate this film as much as other people on the internet do. There was still quality delivered in this film, from a few of its locations to its attempted political commentary. However, Diary is where a lot of the cracks started to show for this franchise, and was an extremely disappointing entry coming off Land, the best film in the second trilogy. Number 6, Day of the Dead 1985. Now we're on to the good movies. Day wasn't very appreciated when it first came out, especially coming off Night and Dawn, some of the greatest horror films of all time. It worked with a much smaller budget than Romero was originally promised, and its cutbacks are very noticeable both visually and story-wise. Nevertheless, the characters absolutely carry this movie. Dr. Sarah Bowman was a well-established protagonist, and her interactions with other characters, especially John, were the best parts of the first and second act. But Bub is still the GOAT. The third act, however, rivals both Night and Dawn with its perfect zombie clustered action, and Tom Savini's practical effects have aged very well, though I do think this movie has a very limited emotional payoff. John Harrison's score perfectly captures this movie's eerie tone. The set design, while bleak and uneventful, are also another great compliment to this film's atmosphere. I thought the conflict of power and danger and science were handled very well, even if they could use better characters to deliver them. Besides some of the dialogue, this movie's biggest issue is its limited expansion of the world, which is something less on Romero and more on the higher-ups who refused to allow him to tell the story that he wanted to tell. Day wasn't an ideal project to conclude this trilogy of zombie movies, but it's a solid film with tons of innovation for the subgenre. Number 5, Land of the Dead. If you wanted to see Romero with the budget that he deserves, this is your film. Land rivals even Dawn in terms of action, has very likable and well-designed characters, even if a few are a bit one-note. And the movie's central theme about class divide and exploitation were clearly well thought out by Romero. The movie looks good, the soundtrack is good, the atmosphere is great, and the story is solid. The third act was slightly underwhelming, and plenty of plot points such as the sudden change in the zombies' intelligence could use a little more fleshing out, but Land functioned as a great expansion to the Of the Dead universe, and arguably one of Romero's last great film projects. Number 4, Night of the Living Dead, 1990. Superb remake of the original classic that functions as a classic in its own right. Everything from the cast, the characters, the first and second act, the visuals, and the dialogue were vastly improved. I love this movie's sound and atmosphere and how it modernizes the formula without disrespecting the original product. My only gripes with this remake are its jarring ending, limited lore expansion, and slightly less graphic gore from film director Tom Savini. But other than that, this movie is an unappreciated classic and a great remake. Number 3, Dawn of the Dead 2004. My absolute favorite Snyder film. The intro is one of the best in cinematic horror, the fast-burning zombies are perfect for this movie's tense and accelerated action, the characters are great even if a few could have been cut, and the plot and story are awesome. The cinematography is classic Snyder and he perfectly brings James Gunn's script to life. The music in this movie is amazing and the atmosphere and set pieces are top-notch. This movie's biggest issue is its lack of social commentary that made the original Dawn so iconic and its sluggish second act. Still, this movie is the best remake of a Romero film. Number 2, Night of the Living Dead, 1968. This movie is what started it all. Without this movie, we wouldn't have one of the most iconic creatures in media history. Despite its dated script and slow second act, this movie is an absolute masterpiece. Every character means something for the story, even if a bit of them are cliches. Dwayne Jones is absolutely perfect in his role as Ben. The build up to the action was brilliantly executed. The effects have aged surprisingly well for its time, and its ending is just perfect in every way. The world building is very effective despite mainly being in one area. This movie's classic charm is very felt throughout, and its atmosphere is standard Romero. Number 1, Dawn of the Dead, 1978. One of the greatest horror movies of all time and arguably the greatest zombie film of all time. This movie's influence is felt in more ways than you could ever imagine. The plot and story is airtight and the social commentary in relation to consumerism and reckless behavior during times of distress are what makes this movie, on top of having well-written characters and a perfect cast. Yeah, the Raider section may feel a little too silly and its tone jumps may feel a little jarring at times, but that does not take away from this movie's old school yet entertaining action, classic Tom Savini makeup and effects, immersive and transmittive atmosphere, augmented setting development, and all-timing soundtrack. Dawn was a perfect sequel to an already incredible horror film prior, and a genre-defining project that perfects the formula in every single way. Well, this retrospective took a lot longer than I originally anticipated, but it was definitely fun. So that's my ranking of the George Romero zombie series as well as all the major remakes. While not all of them lived up to the high bar set by Night and Dawn, it's 100% fair to appreciate how unique each of them are in their own right. Except for you two. No two movies are the same and they each tackle a different era of horror in their respective time period. You can really learn a lot about the state of media at the time just through these movies alone. While the Of the Dead series is far from perfect, there is no denying its impact. It gave us one of the best fictional creatures of all time, paved the way for a new style of horror, and influenced more projects than you could even imagine. Without this series, I wouldn't have Call of Duty or Resident Evil as some of my favorite games of all time. George is definitely a filmmaker that deserves every bit of praise that he gets, and while he may not have been the most consistent, there is no denying his place in the Film Directors Hall of Fame. Rest in peace, George A. Romero.